Hello everyone, today I'm here to review for you Setup, which is a brand new 2 to 4 player tile sort of game, but it also feels really like a card game of old, a Rummy-ish sort of game. The game is from Bezer Wizard Studios and also slightly Asmodee UK, because they import it and distribute it here, who did send me a copy of the game to review. With the intro out the way, let's go roughly over how the game plays, and then I'll give you my pros and cons. Setup is a tile-based game, which the game literally calls them card tiles. There's 5 suits. You've got the 4 normal ones, and then you've also got stars. You're going to be adding tiles to the board on your turn, trying to create sets which are scoring you points. Sets, just like in Rummy-ish sort of games, is either a run of the same suit, so maybe a 3, 4, 5 of hearts, or maybe it's the same number from a variety of suits. So the 4 stars, 4 of spades and 4 of clubs, and that's getting you again a sort of a set of 3. Now you can be sort of making more than one set on a turn, but you are only able to be adding tiles to one set at a time. On a turn you're going to be adding tiles from your hand. You've got a hand of 4 tiles, you've got a public hand of 4 tiles, or you can do sort of a combination of the two. Now you can add them to any of the public spots, so those are the 4 spaces in the middle, as well as any unused players sort of zones. You can also add them to your own personal zone, but you can't add them to the ones from the other players are that colour of. When you add these tiles onto the board, you then check what sets have you actually made, and anything that is included in a set, that's scoring you 1 point for that tile. Very importantly, you don't score the sets separately, it's just every tile that you've managed to put into a set. Now, one thing that is important when you're scoring those sets is that if you've utilised a number from an opponent's sort of personal zone, they will score a point for it as well as you. So it can mean sometimes you score yourself, say, 4 or 5 points, but you've scored maybe 1 or 2 points for an opponent, or maybe a couple of opponents, depending on what run you've made. It doesn't matter too much as long as you're scoring more points, but it does feel quite nice on someone else's turn when you get a little bit of movement on the track sort of thing. If you don't think much to your tiles, or maybe even the public tiles, you can instead put as many tiles from your hand back into the bag and take new tiles as sort of like a swap tile action. You have to do that if you can't make a set, but otherwise it's quite an underused thing. You've got a little player piece that you're going to be moving around the edge of the board depending on how many points you've scored, and it's kind of a bit of a race. You're trying to get past a certain finish line depending on your player count. It's sort of denoted on the board, and as soon as someone's managed to get past that line, the game is over and whoever's furthest past wins. Let's start off with the production quality, which has some pros and some cons of its own. I really like the sort of tiles. They're nice and clear and obvious exactly what number and suit they are of. They do feel really nice when they when you're sort of rustling and rattling them around the bag to pull some new ones to add them onto your nice little tile holder, which again is a nice cool thing that you're not having to hold these tiles. I do think the main game board, which isn't really going to get much sort of abuse, you're placing these tiles on, you're not really doing much else with it. Well, it feels a little bit on the sort of thin side. It's not like thin card, it's still a thick cardboard. It just doesn't sort of maybe feel as premium as some other games that I've got in the collection. But I do sort of really rate it. It is exactly what you need from this style of game overall. It's got those nice tiles that feel like they would be cards that you're rattling around in the nice drawer bag, and those tile holders, well, that just is a nicety, so you're not holding on to them for the whole game. You've just got them in front of you sort of thing. So I like the production quality overall. But what's the use of good production if the game isn't good? Well, actually, it kind of is. It feels really like one of those old style card games. It really feels like that's probably where it started. But with the sort of layout of the board and the tiles, it feels like it would maybe be hard to do with cards that were a good size to hold. The tiles just sort of slot nicely, they stack nicely as you're adding them to the board. It's really obvious because of the way the lines are that you can sort of do one of these runs in a funny direction. You don't have to do them in just a perfectly straight line. They can sort of zigzag across the board as long as the next tile is adjacent to it, even diagonally. Well, you can use it most of the time. And you're not necessarily wanting to use your opponent's ones, which are, again, those zones on the board. They're coloured, so you know exactly how it all sort of works just by looking at the game. Much like a card game where you'd be at the mercy of the deck, you are somewhat at the mercy of the tiles you're pulling from the bag. You can very much find that, none of these numbers are really working for me, or there's not really something that works between my hand and the common hand, and then your opponent goes and plays down like 3 tiles, scoring like 6 points or 7 points or whatever in one turn, and you're like, wow, that's a lot. So you are somewhat at the mercy of that tile pull, but depending on your player count, that's also your sort of how much that's going to impact you really does change. At 2-player, it feels much more strategic, as, well, what I'm adding to the board, or maybe covering up on the board, is directly impacting my opponent. However, at a higher player count, it's much more chaotic. It doesn't really matter what's on the board now if it's the next person's turn, because it's going to have changed. Potentially, like 6 of the tiles may have changed quite a lot between my turn and the next player. So you can't line yourself up maybe for, these could work if I could play them now and then play these next turn and sort of hope my one opponent doesn't block that. You can't really do that when there's 4 players, because it's just a bit more chaos, more sort of chance for different tiles to be coming in. Well, it just feels like at the 2-player count, which I think I prefer it at, you can sort of count a little bit more, like, the sort of low numbers of the hearts have come out, so I've got the 5, but like the 1, 2, 3 and 4 are already out and covered up. So unless I'm going to use it for something higher, I might as well use it for this set of 5s, that sort of thing. I find that's just easier to sort of pay attention to and know what's going on at the 2 players. But you do definitely have to be paying attention to what you might be leaving for your opponent at 2, whereas at 4, you don't care. You're just trying to score points. The one thing that does sort of take slightly away from that luck factor, although is also its own luck factor, is that common hand. I do really like that, because 4 tiles in your own personal hand just doesn't always feel enough. It doesn't feel like, unless I'm swapping tiles in over and over again to try and get a run or something to then play it onto the board, well, just having the extra 4 tiles maybe does give you that one option of, I could use 1 or 2 of my tiles and 1 from the common hand. It just means you've got a few more choices, and I really do like that. It feels like that's something that they sort of maybe started developing this game without that common hand, and then went, we need something extra, because 4 tiles isn't enough, but too many would be weird. And that common hand just really helps you sort of sometimes being able to make a bigger play. So I really do like that common hand. That's a definite pro. I do like the fact that on other players' turns you can get points. It doesn't necessarily involve you as much as in other games when that happens, though. It feels like it is completely out of your hands, and sometimes it's like, that was really nice, you've utilised my 1 and 2 hearts here, and then you've added a 3 next to it, so you've scored 3 points, but I've scored 2, so I'm pretty happy with that. It does feel like it's very much out your hands. You don't really ever line it up for your opponent to use to get points. You can slightly, like if you've put a 1 and a 2 down, you can hope that someone else is going to play a 3 for an easy 3 points for them, but you can't really sort of force someone else's hand into it. But points coming away on someone else's turn, well, that's nice. It certainly helps you round the track, even when you're not playing tiles. The biggest pro for the game is that it's super simple. You are, on your turn, either placing some tiles down to make a set, or you're going to trade some tiles in to sort of hope that you get some better ones, maybe a bigger set that you can play down on your next turn. I do, though, think that that second option is underused. It feels very much like if you can get even a few points from placing a couple of tiles from the common hand, or a combination of your hand and the common hand, if you can get even a few points, well, it's pretty much always going to be worth doing that, because otherwise your opponent might use that tile from the common hand, depending on if it's 2, 3 or 4. You know, if it's at 2, they might use it. If it's at 3 or 4, chances are not in your favour that that number is still going to be in there in that common hand when it comes back round to you. So I do feel that you often are just, if you can play tiles and score points, that's what you're going to be doing. And it feels like only if you can not do anything will you actually go for the replace your tiles option. So super simple, like that sort of old school card game. So I think this will really resonate for families and sort of people that want to play sort of an old feeling game, but with some nice production quality. And that's pretty much where I sit. If you're looking for a very sort of chilled game that you're not going to be taxing your head too much on, you're going for that sort of cardish sort of gameplay of getting runs or sets, it just sort of makes sense to a lot of people. Even though they've added that sort of 5th set of the stars in, it's still super easy to teach, get to the table and enjoy. There is some luck to the game, and though the common hand sort of helps you at least feel like you can often play stuff on your turn, well, I think that means it's actually only just going to be better for families, because, well, it gives others a chance to win, whereas, you know, maybe if it was just purely tactical and strategic, well, maybe they wouldn't stand a chance. But they can, because they could get some good tiles, hopefully a couple of 3s or a couple of 8s or whatever out the bag, and then they've got some guaranteed points on their next turn, that sort of thing. So I think families will really enjoy Setup, and it feels like one of those games where if it had come out many years ago, it would be everywhere. It would be one of those stapley sort of card games, or in this case tile games, that everyone sort of just knows. Maybe now it's not as inspiring or bold and different, but it's one of those ones that a family could definitely come back to over and over again and enjoy along the way. And that is Setup. So hopefully this review has helped you know if it's for you, for your family, for your gaming group, if Setup is a good choice for you. If it has, please let me know in the comments section below. Hit that like button and, well, subscribe for more amazing times with Don't Be Bored.